episode titled Peppa's Creepy Wings. It was a normal morning in the Pig family house. Mummy Pig was making breakfast, Daddy Pig was reading the newspaper, George played with his dinosaur, and Peppa was sitting at the table drawing. Everything seemed calm until Peppa felt a strange tingling in her back. She turned around and saw tiny, transparent wings sprouting from her shoulders. "Oh!" Peppa gasped. She touched the wings. They trembled and shimmered in the morning light. George walked in and immediately noticed them. "Peppa, what is that?" he asked. "I don't know," Peppa replied. "They just appeared." Mummy Pig came closer and looked carefully. "Peppa, this is unusual," she said. "Be careful, don't fall." But the wings kept growing, at first small, then long enough to almost reach the floor. Every time Peppa took a step, the wings swayed slightly, and a soft whisper seemed to echo her name. Peppa tried to lift them. At first, nothing happened, but when she waved her arms, she almost lifted off the ground. A gentle breeze ruffled her hair. George watched in amazement. "Peppa, this is strange," he said. Peppa felt uneasy. The wings began to move her slowly forward as if they wanted to take her somewhere. She tried to stop, but her feet felt stuck to the floor. Mummy Pig and Daddy Pig tried to help but couldn't touch the wings. They were cold and transparent, like thin glass. "Peppa, what do you feel?" asked Mummy Pig. "It's strange," whispered Peppa. "They seem like they want to fly." Peppa stepped back carefully, and the wings immediately spread, lifting her slightly above the floor. She felt dizzy. George grabbed her hand. "Peppa, hold on!" The wings began to flap slowly on their own. The room filled with a quiet sound of air cutting through space. Peppa realized that this was not just about growing wings. It was the start of something new, unusual, and slightly frightening. By evening, the wings had shrunk a little but were still visible. Peppa couldn't hide them under her clothes. She looked in the mirror and saw her reflection with transparent wings. Mummy Pig explained that it might be temporary, and they should watch over them. At night, Peppa woke. Her wings trembled slightly and glowed softly in the dark. She walked to the window and looked outside. The garden's shadows moved quietly, and a light breeze wrapped around her wings. She realized that tomorrow the wings might carry her to unusual places again, and that every step with them would be a small adventure. Episode titled Creepy Copies. It was a normal morning at the Pig family house. Mummy Pig was cooking breakfast, Daddy Pig was reading the newspaper, and Peppa was playing in her room. Suddenly, she noticed something strange in the kitchen. She walked over to the door, peered inside, and froze. There, standing at the table, was a copy of herself. "Peppa!" Mummy Pig called out, but Peppa didn't respond as her copy smiled and took a step aside, mimicking her every move. "Mom!" Peppa shouted, but when she turned around, the copy had disappeared. Peppa thought it must have been her imagination. She returned to her room and resumed playing. However, the next morning, when Peppa entered the kitchen, the situation repeated itself. This time, the copy was dressed differently, and there was something off about her. Her smile was wider and her eyes brighter. She stood at the table, staring at Peppa. Peppa froze. "Mom!" she shouted again, but Mummy Pig didn't notice anything strange. Everything seemed fine. Peppa began to fear that her imagination was playing tricks on her, but the strange occurrences continued. Every morning, when she entered the kitchen or the living room, she would see a new copy of herself. They looked similar, but each time something changed. One copy was slightly taller, another had a more vacant, strange expression on her face. Sometimes they just stood there watching, and other times they would mimic Peppa's actions. Peppa tried to ignore them, but the more she did, the more they appeared. One evening, after Peppa returned from the garden, she heard someone laughing in her room. It was her laugh, but with an unsettling edge to it. Peppa walked into the room and saw a group of her copies. They were all sitting, watching her and giggling. Each copy was slightly different from the last, and their laughter had taken on an eerie quality. Peppa felt a chill down her spine and tried to leave, but the door was locked. She was trapped. The copies began moving toward her, mimicking her every movement, as if they were her, but with something darker in their eyes. "You can't leave," one of the copies said. "We are all part of you." Peppa was terrified. She tried to escape, but no door would open. Everything felt like a nightmare. Each copy seemed to want to replace her. Soon, all the copies disappeared. Peppa woke up in her room. She wasn't sure if it had been a dream or reality, but she definitely felt that something was wrong. The next morning, Peppa woke up and, as usual, went to the kitchen. But her heart stopped when she saw that sitting at the table was a new copy of herself. This one had an even stranger smile and eyes. Episode titled Peppa's Creepy Eyes. It was a normal morning at the Pig family house. Mummy Pig was cooking breakfast, Daddy Pig was reading the newspaper, and Peppa and George were playing on the floor. Peppa felt as usual, happily playing with her toys. But today, something strange began to happen. She suddenly felt a weird sensation in her eyes. At first, it was a light tingling, and then it felt like someone was pulling her eyes, stretching them. She didn't pay much attention to it at first. Breakfast passed like usual, but Peppa still felt a strange heaviness in her eyes. When she went to her room to play, she looked in the mirror and froze. Under her eyes, two new small eyes had appeared, moving as if they were alive. Peppa couldn't understand what was happening, but the eyes clearly weren't hers. "Mummy! Daddy!" she cried, but no one came. Peppa stepped closer to the mirror and saw the new eyes turning, following her movements. She touched them, but they were cold and unmoving. When Mummy Pig entered the room, she didn't notice anything unusual. Peppa tried to explain what was happening to her, but she couldn't find the words. The new eyes kept watching her, moving on their own, and Peppa began to doubt whether she was losing her mind. That evening, when the family sat down for dinner, Peppa felt another eye appear on her neck. It was smaller, but just like the others. Soon, there were several more, on her forehead, on her arms, and each eye was watching. Peppa tried to hide them, but they kept becoming more active, and with every passing moment, she felt like she was losing control over her own body. Peppa tried to run out of the house, but every time she turned around, the eyes were following her, creating an overwhelming sense of being watched. One night, she woke up to a strange whispering. At first, she thought it was in her head, but soon she realized that it was coming from her eyes. "Don't be afraid," the eyes on her neck whispered softly. Peppa screamed and ran into the hallway. She locked the door, but in a moment her eyes started moving again, lifting up to the mirror, looking in different directions. All of her eyes, as if under control, started whispering the same thing. "You're not alone." A sense of dread and fear overtook Peppa. She didn't know what was happening to her. Only one thought kept spinning in her mind. What if these eyes weren't just a part of her, but something more? What if they were watching her, waiting to take her away? Episode titled Cursed Fridge. It was a normal morning in the Pig family house. Mummy Pig was making breakfast. Daddy Pig was reading the newspaper. Peppa was playing with George, when Peppa noticed a strange corner of the kitchen. In it stood a refrigerator she had never seen before. It was tall, old, with a dark metal door slightly flickering in the morning light. Peppa approached and sniffed it. The smell was strange, cold, and slightly sweet. Curiosity took over. Peppa opened the door, and a blast of cold air hit her. Inside it was dark, but she saw a small glowing space, as if the refrigerator was not a normal fridge, but a tiny tunnel. She leaned in, and suddenly the door slammed shut behind her. Peppa tried to open it, but the handle was heavy, as if some magical force was holding her inside. Peppa started to panic. She pushed, pulled, but the door wouldn't budge. The light inside the refrigerator was strange, changing from bright blue to dim red. Peppa saw her reflection on the wall, but it was slightly wrong. The eyes were wider and the smile too large. Peppa shivered and stepped back. Inside the fridge, the space seemed bigger than it should be. Boxes and bottles were arranged like a narrow corridor. Peppa walked forward, and the corridor stretched endlessly. Occasionally, she heard faint creaks and rustles, as if someone was walking nearby. But when she turned, no one was there. She called, "Mummy! Daddy! George!" But her voice echoed and disappeared into the strange space. She found a small door deeper inside the refrigerator. She opened it and entered an even stranger section, darker, with heavy air. Peppa felt the refrigerator watching every movement. She tried to go back, but the path had vanished. It seemed the fridge itself was changing the corridors, trapping her. Time inside became distorted. Clocks on the walls spun too fast or slowed down completely. Peppa felt tired but kept walking, searching for an exit. Suddenly, she saw a small light at the end of the corridor. She ran toward it, hoping for freedom. When the light reached the door, Peppa pushed it hard and emerged into the kitchen. The refrigerator was in its place, but looked old and normal. It no longer flickered. Peppa sat on the floor, catching her breath. Mummy Pig came over and hugged her. "Peppa, what happened?" she asked. Peppa could not explain at once. She only stared at the refrigerator. It seemed to flicker slightly in the corner again. Her heart was racing. She knew this strange refrigerator was not ordinary, and she understood that some things in the house are better left alone. Episode titled, "The Strange Shop." It was a normal morning. Mummy Pig was making breakfast, Daddy Pig was reading the newspaper, Peppa came downstairs and said, "Good morning," and George was playing with his dinosaur on the floor. After breakfast, the family decided to go to the city. Outside, everything felt calm. Shops were opening and people were walking along the street. Peppa held George's hand while he carried his dinosaur. As they walked, Peppa noticed a small shop standing slightly apart from the others. The sign above it was faded and the words were hard to read. The door was slightly open. Peppa said she wanted to take a look. Daddy Pig agreed, but said it would be quick. They stepped inside. The shop was quiet. The shelves were filled with toys. There were dolls, cars, and soft animals. Everything looked new, but there was no shopkeeper. Peppa picked up a toy. It felt nice to hold. She placed it back. George walked to a shelf and placed his dinosaur next to the other toys. He said, "Dinosaur," and looked at them. Then he got distracted and walked away. A minute later, he came back. His dinosaur was gone. He looked at the shelf again. There were many similar toys, but none of them were exactly his. George started looking around. He walked between the shelves and quietly repeated, "Dinosaur." Peppa helped him search. It felt like there were more toys than before. Some of them looked familiar. She looked closer and realized they resembled toys children had been holding outside. Daddy Pig said it was time to leave. George did not find his dinosaur and they left the shop. Outside, everything seemed normal again. But Peppa turned back for a moment. In the shop window, there were toys on display. Among them was George's dinosaur. It stood still. Peppa said nothing. In the evening, George sat at home and played with a new toy. It looked similar to his dinosaur, but slightly different. He quietly said, "Dinosaur," but sometimes paused, as if waiting for a response. At night, Peppa woke up. She thought she heard a sound from the hallway. She stepped outside and saw toys on the floor. There were more than during the day. Among them was George's dinosaur. It lay slightly apart from the others. Peppa did not pick it up. In the morning, everything seemed normal. There were fewer toys again. George was playing and smiling. But when Peppa looked at the shelf, it felt like one toy was missing.